and at Polycom. Prior to that, he was involved in the design and development of advanced electronics for military laser and smart weapon systems. So be careful what news you let slip to his ear. We're going to go ahead and kick that off. To say all of this is that this is a very wizened and knowledgeable group of experts that we pulled together for this audio conference. And so I want to go ahead and turn it over to Troy, who's going to give us some introductory slides. It's all yours, Troy.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to take control of the slides here. Great. Hopefully everybody can see that. So why is audio and video conferencing so important? Obviously, intelligibility between the near and the far end is the goal. And so often this goal is either missed or even ignored in favor of the video component. Video conferencing without intelligible audio, I often describe as fancy surveillance. And advance the slides. Let's see, sorry. There we go. The percentage of meetings that are now virtual obviously have skyrocketed over the last 12 months. Those using video conferencing for work-related purposes has surged. We can expect an increase in this, over the next decade or so. It's not going away. The need for more well-designed equipped meeting spaces is key. Over the last 12 months, I've seen people renovating older spaces, trying to improve them, changing the way the rooms are configured due to distance spaces and increasing social distancing. And obviously, people are now decentralized. Not everybody's going into the office. People are working remote, and that brings with it a whole nother set of challenges. And
hey, Troy?
Yeah?
Could you switch to presenter mode? We're seeing your note screen.
Okay, let's see here. I'll stop for a second and try that one more time. How about there, Tom?
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for a heads up. Back to the office. Absolutely. People want to get back. There's only about 12% of the people who want to stay at home. The remaining 88% want to return to the workforce in some fashion. 44% of those have had it with their family and don't want to spend any more time at home. Whereas the remaining percentage want some sort of flexible work. That could be 1 or 2 days in the office, 3 or 4 days in the office, but certainly some more flexible work rate. So we're going to have to find a way to improve not only what we're hearing in the office, but also what people are using at home. Why do they want to go back to the office? Well, I guess their work family, right? People are what they miss, collaborating with others, staying up to date on what others are working on. We don't have that casual encounter at the water cooler anymore to see what people are up to and what they're doing. We actually have to make some effort to discuss what we're working on with our co-workers. Not quite a top 10, a top 9, but what I found interesting from this top 9 is that there are 2 items on this list that are specific to the way people work. So scheduled meetings with colleagues is certainly an issue. And ideally, they want to meet face-to-face. So yes, they miss their work family, but they're also finding that meeting face-to-face, and even more importantly, the technology that they have in the workplace makes for a more effective presentation and collaboration effort. Now, interestingly enough, prior to the pandemic, pre-COVID, Shure did a survey. We hired a firm to ask people. They were unaware that it was an audio company asking questions. And what we found out was that 4 out of the 5 top frustrations in video conferencing were audio related. That included background noise as the #1 highest offender, echo, audio cutting out, and the inability to hear some of the other people on the call. And again, this was done without any knowledge at all that it was an audio company asking for the research and the data. Complications when we're working remote, certainly background noise rears its ugly head again. Other things like internet speed and not having the right workplace tools and equipment becoming an issue as well. Interestingly, again, 81% of those surveyed believed flawless audio would improve the quality of their virtual meetings, their overall effectiveness. Now, what I found interesting in the same exact survey, when they were asked after how important they thought audio was, when they were asked what they intend to spend their budget money on, the next answer was video. So despite the fact that they have figured out that audio is very important, and without it, again, it just turns into fancy surveillance, it seems that the almighty video is still attracting the lion's share of the budgetary money that's being spent in conferencing spaces. Pre-pandemic, we were really more interested in wishing grandma or our parents happy birthday. And at that point, we were, I guess, happy to live with less than stellar performance on the audio side. Once we entered into the pandemic and we were all forced to work from home, people certainly started to pay attention to the audio, whether that was interruptions from family members when you were working in the kitchen, or connectivity issues, poor microphones, poor microphone placement, no microphone at all, just using what's available in the laptop itself. But as the lockdown restrictions continued, a lot of companies offered some subsidies for people to improve performance at home. And I think this is going to continue, certainly, as we move towards a more hybrid model in the case of coming out of this pandemic. How to improve the audio in a conferencing systems moving forward? That's the main purpose of the webinar today. So we have a new set of challenges. Social distancing certainly is a hard metric we need to observe, ultimately leading to lesser occupancy in the conference spaces. And I suspect with certain conference types, their shape and usage will change. It could also mean the end of certain types of rooms. The huddle space, for example, might be a victim of the pandemic. Does it really make sense for 2 or 3 people to travel all the way into the office just to have a meeting? I think we've learned how to work remotely during the pandemic, and it will certainly have an effect on how we design the spaces and the technology and the audio that we put into the spaces. So audio quality is now more important for unified communications. During this webinar, we hope to clarify some of the challenges for you and improve the experience in your rooms. Tom, I'll throw it back to you.
Thank you, Troy. I appreciate that. I think that's a great overview for where we're going to start. One of the comments that you made and that I was found particularly interesting was the number of people who preferred a face-to-face environment. And I think that we would all agree that face-to-face is really the best way to do things. It enables us to be able to catch visual cues of people that we're talking with, as well as listen a little bit more closely. We're geared as a species towards that from a communication standpoint. And I've always contended that anything else adds a filter that detracts from that, regardless of what that might be, whether you're on a Zoom meeting or you're doing the postage stamps like we are now, Brady Bunch, or if you are meeting from room to room. So the first thing that I want to ask here is kind of kick things off is, what are those audio filters that we typically see in a system, regardless of the size and the complexity of it, and how do we compensate for that? What do we do in order to overcome those pieces? And I want to go ahead and kick that off with Craig, if you could go ahead and respond to that first, and then anyone else, if you can join in.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I mean, I think from a conference room perspective, when you're talking about filters, you're talking about things that detract from the overall experience. And I think the classic problems that we've always had in some of these spaces, has to do with proximity to a microphone, the background noise in the room, the amount of multipath reverberation in a room that makes the audio sound hollow. And I think all of that or at least most of that, are things that we can solve or have been solved by manufacturers or technology or just proper design to kind of reduce those barriers so that you do get the benefit of near face-to-face audio communication by being remote. And I think the technology has shown over the last 20 years or so that there have been significant improvements in microphones, in people's awareness of background noise, and how to diffuse some of that actually in the room.
Right. Jay, I know that you've got some sample files that we could listen to that kind of help with some of those issues and help to describe some of the pieces that we run into. Could you go ahead and share those and talk about those?
Will do, Tom. Thank you. So I'm going to play some sample recordings from the MyAmp support website, and these were made to provide perspective context of distance, noise, and acoustics on what we're going to send as far as outbound audio. So this is one of our ceiling microphones. I'm going to set it for a 2-meter distance in a room that's qualified as great, and we expound on what qualifies rooms, the room acoustics. So what I'm going to do right now is just go ahead and play some samples just to give that context of it. So microphone's 6.5 feet from the talker.
You're listening to an example of the
Actually, let me make sure. Were you hearing that? If not,
We hear it.
okay, great.
MyAmp beam tracking microphones pick up at a given distance.
Okay, so great and great. So let's go to a fair room.
You're listening to an example of the MyAmp beam tracking microphones pick up at a given distance.
So that was a fair room, same distance, a little more noise, and direct to reverberant is lower. Now I'm going to go into a poor room. Same thing.
You're listening to an example of the MyAmp beam tracking microphones pick up at a given distance.
So that's an example of ceiling microphone in the same, and it could be certainly a similarly sized space. It may not be, but the distance from the microphone to the talker is always the same. So just that's the context of room acoustics, ambient noise, and distance from talker.
So what's changed between each one of those, Jay?
So what's changed is it's actually the environment. You have to take yourself to thinking, what's the result going to be if I'm in a room that's quiet, noise isolation, so we don't have a lot of noise intrusion, and that we have a relatively it's a relatively dry room. The difference is that we're listening to a microphone at the same distance. What's changed from our perspective as we listen to this is the room acoustics have changed, and I'm going to lump acoustics and noise together as both detracting from audio quality and in fact intelligibility as well. So in terms of filters, to Craig's point, the filter here really is what's the room doing to audio, and ways to, I'm sure we'll talk about ways to mitigate that. But as I look at Jim Smith on a headphone mic, having the microphone extremely close to the talker starts to mitigate that, because direct to reflected goes way up and you're way over the noise floor.
It's always handy, because one of the things that one finds over time is that it's fairly easy to try to pay attention to audio that has difficulties, at least initially. Over time, though, it becomes very fatiguing, and people find that they lose focus of the meeting, lose focus of the information, and that audio quality plays a real role in people's fatigue factor.
That's true. One of the things that I've done in the past to kind of demonstrate that to people is we'll be in a conference room and I'll say, okay, I'm just going to turn my tape recorder on here and record what's going on in this meeting for a minute or so. And then we're going to go back and listen to it. And then I'll tell them, okay, this is what, you and I have been having this conversation back and forth, and we've understood one another. We have the ability face to face to be able to filter out other sounds, other things that are going on around that could be a distraction. But the microphone that's in the room doesn't necessarily have that ability. And so when you go back and you listen to that recording, you hear the voices of the people speaking, you hear the HVAC turn on and turn off. You are able to hear the impact of reverberation or decay rate within the space itself, and give them an example of, okay, this is what the person on the other end of the line is listening to, and what they're going to have to battle through for a meeting for an hour or 2 hours or 4, or some cases, it could be an all day kind of a situation. Are there other examples or other ways that you found to be able to communicate this information to people when they're considering audio and video conferencing within their spaces? I'll just open that up to anybody.
One of the things that's been helpful when I've been involved with such things in the past is having people be part of a conference for an extended period of time. Being in that less than benign environment for an extended period of time. And then they actually get to experience the fatigue factor. And that can make a really big difference. Again, people can stand just about anything for a short amount of time and accommodate it. It's after that extended length of time that things fall apart.
Tom, just to add on to that too, I think most of the time people don't, if they're in their room, they may not really appreciate that the acoustics sound bad to the people at the remote site. So until they have a chance to listen to what that room sounds like, they may not know. And then there may also be the CEO syndrome, where nobody wants to tell the CEO that the fancy room doesn't sound great. And so it just perpetuates.
Yeah, I agree with that. Often if it's a bigger client, they have some good rooms typically, right? And then they build some bad rooms, and they don't know it themselves, what constitutes a good room from a bad room. They just know the room's not working for them.
Right.
So sometimes just pointing out what those different components are, what makes a good room and bad room in their own facility helps them understand the process a little bit better.
True. Good point. Kind of talking about these things because we're referring to aspects of the room design itself. What are some recommended noise criteria for conference spaces? What works and does not work from the standpoint of the noise that you are going to have in a room that you're designing and building?
Yeah, if you're looking at a target, for me, Tom, NC 30 is the target, right? With the upper end of that being NC 35. Once you get up to NC 40 or above, we do have noise reduction in a lot of the DSP that we're putting in these rooms, but it processes the audio, right? And you're fighting something that is probably better solved mechanically than it is electronically. But if, so many times you end up in a space that's already built, and that could be a room with 4 walls of glass, a very noisy HVAC system, and then all you have is the technology at hand to try to make it better. You're struggling. If you're in a position to get in early with the client and explain why one room is better than another and why, certainly starting from the room design itself is key. So for me, the target is NC 30. The upper end being in the good range is NC 35. Once you get up to NC 40 and above, it goes from fair to poor pretty quickly.
So if I could, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jay.
I just want to just elaborate on 2 things. One is, yes, there's some outstanding noise reduction capability in digital signal processing, but that noise reduction is for the far end participants. It's important that we don't ignore the conditions in the room for the local meeting participants, because while you can improve things for somebody at the far end, if you have folks that are spread apart in a large room and it's a noisy room, you're going to impede their ability to their speech intelligibility back and forth for in-room conversation. So both, it's life is a lot easier when the room is optimized for meetings, and that means not depending entirely on signal processing to take care of it, because you have people in the room as well.
Okay, good. I think another thing to kind of toss in here, we've been referring to NC or noise criteria ratings, and ASHRAE has published a chart that they're actually moving to a different standard called RC in their fundamentals handbook. And that's a useful tool in the design process when you're talking with a designer, architect, and mechanical engineer as to what the target value is that you need to hit within that space. I'm not sure what the correlation is between NC and RC is at this point, but if we can find something on that, we'll go ahead and post that and get that out on the in the chat or in the question and answer. So another question, there's quite a few things coming in here. One of the ones I wanted to get to, we talked about NC and the things that contribute to that. Are there any recommended, what's the recommended approach in regards to acoustical room treatment within the space? And is reverberation time really the useful thing to be talking about, or do we look at another metric in order to define what that environment is like internally?
For me personally, I always struggle with using the word reverberation time in these smaller spaces. It's I don't not just, it's maybe difficult to measure correctly. There just isn't enough of a decay time. Certainly the decay time in the room, is the room inert? There are other metrics like C50 and something else that people are discussing, D50. And those are interesting measurements, harder to accomplish. I think the reason we talk about the RT60 is that there are even phone apps that allow you to, measure the reverberation time of a room. But I think the rule of thumb there is that an inner room, an acoustically dead room, is going to be better for near and far end communication than a live room. Again, getting back to the 4 walls of glass, just add water and a fish, you got yourself an aquarium type of conference room design. So inert better. Even if you have 2 walls of glass, trying to get some absorption into the space on the remaining 2 walls, certainly carpeting, ceiling if you can, is desirable.
Yeah, so 2 non-parallel walls in the room, acoustically absorptive, gets rid of a whole bunch of the resonance modes and the reflection possibilities in the room, making it more intelligible in general for everyone, whether they're near or far. And if you can make a room that works really well for folks at the far end, it tends to be pretty reasonable for folks at the near end too.
And Jim, I think the complement of that is also, if it doesn't sound great for the near end people, it's going to sound even worse for the far end people, because your room effect will be convolved with their room effect, basically, by the time they hear it. So if you have a marginal room locally just for local communications, then it's probably not going to be a successful conferencing room.
It's true. I think one of the, rather than use reverb time, I've always looked at decay rate within the space. And the faster that rate falls off, you can calculate reverb time from decay rate and go back and forth on those. But again, I think it comes to an issue of being able, particularly in a retrofit, where are the smart places to put absorption within the space? And that can be dependent to some extent on room size, obviously, 2 non-parallel walls or 2 adjacent corners. If you're in a huddle space, maybe taking the front wall behind the display and putting absorption there, that knocks that first reflection down quite a lot and can aid in that. So one of the questions that came up here that's kind of related to that was, will a lower NC value, with a lower NC value in a room, do you find that a higher reverberation time or a slower decay rate is acceptable? Are those 2 interchangeable?
certainly having a lower NC helps with the ambient sound in the room. But I wouldn't forego one for the other. Um, it's that early to late energy ratio, which is really part of what clarity index or C50 measurement is all about, which is
Mhm.
going to affect intelligibility. So if you have reflective surfaces and they arrive at a specific time after the direct sound, they're going to affect intelligibility as much as any other ambient noise in the room, such as HVAC, right? Having a good NC level with the HVAC doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good acoustically sounding room in terms of intelligibility.
Yeah,
Anybody
I would agree with that. I kind of view them as almost a little orthogonal, where you want to minimize both of them, obviously, but minimizing one is certainly better than not minimizing either of them.
Okay, great. I want to shift a little bit to another question. A lot of the spaces that we're dealing with, so for instance, we're all in separate rooms right now, and I'm relying on the echo cancellation built into this app to do that acoustic echo cancellation for me within this space. When is a DSP needed beyond the native echo cancellation of an application such as Teams or Zoom or WebEx? Let's chat about that for a little bit.
So one of the things I was thinking about that, Tom, is I think there's a couple of dimensions to this as well. I think a lot of the apps that are built into soft codecs PCs are kind of optimized and tested for one or just a few talkers that might be close to whatever microphone is there. And so anytime you get more than a few participants or people are spaced out where the echo paths are going to change more dramatically than might have been designed in as one small part of a soft codec, then getting an external echo canceller where you can solve that problem multiple times on different microphone inputs with the multi-channel or having smarter microphones will actually help on that process as well. So for me, it's anytime there's more than a few people in a small room, I would definitely recommend looking at adding a kind of a heavier duty acoustic echo cancellation solution.
You do have to be careful about the applications that are used, because some of them don't allow an external echo canceller to act independently unless it's an approved device. So you've got this potential problem of cascading echo cancellers accidentally because the application doesn't recognize your particular device as a compatible echo canceller. And then it runs its own echo canceller in addition to whatever you're running outboard.
Is that the idea behind a room that's been certified for Teams or Zoom, Jim?
Yeah, actually it is, because they recognize the external device that's attached and then disable their own internal echo canceller or whatever audio processing meets the approval of the spec. So there's some of the details in at least one of the applications. They maintain control of the automatic gain control, but they allow the external device to do the echo cancellation, which is kind of an interesting perspective. They don't give 100% control to the remote or to the outboard device.
Okay. And how do you check for that?
Ooh, good friend at the far end. Really, there's a lot of what we find is that there aren't a lot of tools available that give a definitive answer as to what the audio quality is at the receiving end. You can check with speech intelligibility tools, but they tend to get corrupted by echo cancelers and other signal processing that's put in place. So it makes it really difficult to get that hard data that you might need for audio quality. Another thing is the audio paths themselves are pretty much subject to the manufacturer of the application or device to match audio levels from end to end and across device families. So you might find that when you're connecting from one soft codec to a different soft codec, the audio level has changed significantly, which allows other things to be a problem. In the audio bridge, where we've got multiple people connected at the same time, there's a mix depth where the different sites that are connected may or may not be able to talk at the same time and be heard at the other end. And that can be set by the bridge administrator, or in the case of something like Zoom, it's set automatically somewhere in the ether, and nobody has an ability to change it. And that might allow one person to talk, or three people to talk, or five people to talk before it starts muting out the less, what it perceives as the less significant conversations. And again, you can't hear this when you're the talker. You can only hear it when you're the listener. And it needs to be a disconnected listener, one who's not participating in the discussion. Otherwise, your audio, the audio of the talker, tends to overwhelm all the other audio. And that person never knows that there's a problem.
What Jim speaks to is there's some advantage to trying to stay on a single platform. For those
Yeah.
of us unlucky enough that have to bounce around between different software codec platforms, it's a roulette wheel experience, not just on audio, but on all of the devices that connect to that software codec.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is true.
The start, though, is optimizing for the room so that you know that you need to hold your outbound audio to a standard. And if somebody is if you're delivering high quality outbound audio, and you can check it before it hits the codec with headphones and listen to what you're sending out, you can listen for echo, things like that, again, with headphones. If there are problems at a far end and you have at least you have some consistency with the bridging service, and I think a couple of you have alluded to the fact, thinking to the good old days, and I'm paraphrasing, where you would have multiple call bridge services for landline phones, and then somebody gets on with a cell phone and says, "Hey, this is terrible." Well, you've got 4 or 5 meeting participants happy with the audio, and somebody says, "Well, no, it's not really good here." Isolating, identifying where things breakdown is pretty important, and feedback to room quality always comes from the far end participant. That's where you're going to hear problems or complaints. You may not be aware if you're an end user until somebody says, "Could you repeat that? I'm having a hard time hearing you," etc. That kind of information tells you it's time to start diagnosing and looking for something.
Right. So start with the room itself and then move out from beyond there. It kind of relates to a question that's been asked and upvoted by a lot of people, and that's how do you move beyond subjective options about quality and include analysis data or analytical data? And what's the difference between acceptable, desirable, perfect, those kinds of things? I know this will open up an entire can of worms to discuss, but want to pose that. How do you do that and move it from the subjective to the objective? What tools are out there? What kinds of things can we point to that will help people in those determinations as to the quality of their systems?
There was a group in a company that I used to work for who were trying to develop a audio test tool suite, and its output was a audio goodness factor, and that was going to be measured in Rodmans, I think was the original terminology that was used, and it was just a some sort of repetitive implementation that could make a determination between a sound of interest and all the other crap that people end up hearing and the remote site, and then assign a goodness factor to it. And then you'd be able to compare that to other environments, other sources, and get some sort of comparative information that was repeatable. And unfortunately, that never came to fruition, because it could have been kind of fun to have. But there aren't a lot. We've said this a few times. There aren't a lot of tools that help you assess the conference audio quality.
I think along those lines, you definitely have to demonstrate what it sounds like to the remote side to people in the local room. And I think Jay Paul referenced that, maybe listening to headphones, what it sounds like to the remote participants from your local room. I think you can make some of the measurements of background noise. You can make some of the measurements of the critical distance to kind of back that up. But it's still going to come down to, this is what you sound like to the remote participants, and this is why we need to improve this. And then I think as part of that process, you have to be able to show how you're going to be able to improve it, whether it's microphone style, microphone proximity, trying to turn off the air conditioning to show what it would sound like without that type of background noise, things like that. So I think you have to take it all kind of together, and I think that the purchasers, the end users, will probably want some quantification with measurements, but ultimately, if it's just measurements and not showing or hearing the audio quality as it is and the potential improvement, then it's hard to move that needle for people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are little side applications in some of the soft codecs that do things like mute keyboard sounds. So the people who don't realize that when they're on a laptop computer at home and they start typing while they're in a meeting, that's heard by everybody else in the conference. And then they forget that if they turn on the keyboard noise reduction, if that's present, that when they're typing, their audio is also muted, because there's kind of no good way to separate both. You get everything or nothing. And these are, again, you only hear it at the other end. The people who are causing the problem don't notice it. So we keep coming back to that, demonstrating what's happening at the other end.
Can I just like to say I'm a huge fan of objective measurement. But at the end of the day, and I hate using the phrase at the end of the day, the evaluation of room performance is still subjective. One of the best diagnostic tools, besides having a pair of headphones, I've found, is making recordings of what happens in a meeting, because at that point you can go back. Even if you're sitting in a room, you can capture what's going on with multiple participants. One participant from different seating locations, turning in a chair. I don't think we want to ignore the fact that some of the problems that happen in conference spaces aren't always the fault of the room acoustics or maybe the equipment. But there's also the factor of how people engage the room. And if you turn away from the microphone, if you lean back in your chair, if you're somebody who speaks quietly, there's often somebody in the meeting who's making distracting noises like that. If you can capture what happens in a meeting, it makes it easier for you to go back and try and figure out what the cause of it is. And the other thing I want to throw out, if you're somebody in the field and you're working on a room that somebody's had a complaint about, make a before capture audio, make an after, so that you have a comparison with what the original issue was, so that you can determine, did I fix something? Did I make it better? Did I make it worse? And but still, the evaluator is going to use their ears and say, yes, the communication is good. I hear, I understand, I'm subjectively pleased with what we're getting, or this doesn't work for us at all. And we get complaints when we host meetings from our room.
Mm-hmm. Troy, I think you were going to say something or add something to that.
No, I agree with Jay. I mean, you need some form of metric, and sometimes that isn't a measurement. Sometimes that is a recording, or a pair of headphones. you know, to let them hear what's feeding into the codec so that they don't suspect the system. It's something else down the, down the line that's affecting the intelligibility at the far end.
Okay.
I think related. Oh, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, Craig.
I was just going to say, related to that, you know, a big part of troubleshooting and solving problems is understanding the system. So understanding kind of the core components, how the echo cancellation works, where the signal path is going through all that. And if you have a better understanding of the foundation of it, then you'll have a better chance of being able to troubleshoot it efficiently and successfully, because there are a lot of dimensions, as Jay mentioned and Troy mentioned, you know, the occupants in the room from their different positions, how they behave, tapping, silverware and plates, all these things happen in real time in conference rooms, and people complain about the audio of forks hitting a plate. Well, you know, mute your microphone or do something else. But there are these real world issues that come up. And I think if you understand what the problem is, then that gets you, you know, a lot farther towards what the solution is. And if you're trying to troubleshoot all sorts of things at once.
Yeah, we've yet to figure out a product that corrects behavior or poor behavior.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight something that Jay made a comment about, and that's being able to not only record what's going outbound of the room, so before you hit the codec on the source room side of things, but then also being able to record something at the receive end of that room too, because you've got an entire system in between those two pieces that can also impact the audio quality. And if you know you're clean on the outbound side, maybe it's something else that's in between and or issues on the other side within the space that you're connecting to as well too.
And what might also be helpful with that is if you want to attribute a metric to that, is do a STIPA measurement prior to the codec and then one in the far end, right?
Okay.
And that at least gives you a value to show somebody as to how far the intelligibility dropped because of what the other issues were.
Because of that, yeah, it's a good point. There was another question in regards to that. Kind of want to move in a slightly different direction in regards to microphones and types of microphones and where to place those microphones. We've had some good demonstrations here of people on the panel. Jim is close mic'd. Jay is a little bit further away with more of a room mic. Craig has a set of noise canceling headphones on with a microphone built in. Troy and I are both using broadcast level or broadcast quality microphones. Let's talk about that within the types of spaces that we're running into. Your experience and kind of the pros and cons of where would you start? What are the pros and cons of the different microphones and the different approaches that are out there? And Troy, let's go ahead and start off with you and then move that to Jay maybe.
It comes down to what is the client willing to accept, right? There's no better way but to keep the microphone as close to the person talking as possible, right? And that's why I'm on a broadcast microphone here at home, but you're not going to put everybody on a broadcast microphone around the table, right? So then we move to table mics, right? And then people don't want us, for years, people didn't want to see mics on a table, and they prefer to move the mics to the ceiling. The issue with that, now the polar response of that microphone plays a large part in what you're hearing direct versus ambient, right? So if you're moving the microphone further away, you need a more directional microphone. And you also would prefer to have some acoustical treatment in the room to keep that ambient sound down. So it's as soon as you move that microphone further and further away from the person who's speaking, it is a bit of a compromise, but there are tools out there that help you accomplish that. And certainly we have a few products and others have products as well, but the directionality of the microphone is probably going to be your best friend as you move that further and further away from the participants.
One thing I want to piggyback on that, I think that's a great That's a great overview on the microphone side of it, is how people are going to use the room too, because it doesn't help you if you have tabletop mics that are close, but people are going to run paper across it as they're handing handouts out to people in the room. So you really have to factor in the behavior of the people using the room as well, because I can tell you there are a few things that are more distracting than having paper run across a tabletop microphone when you're on the remote side.
I'd argue opening a bag of chips might be profoundly worse than that in terms of what somebody might hear at the far end. But it all good points. But you know, to the point, for a long time, our options really were fixed microphones in terms of directivity. You chose a cardioid, an omni, supercardioid, et cetera, and you had different form factors of microphones to work with. You could locate on the table, you could locate on the ceiling. And I think for a long time, probably all of us that may be on the call have avoided the use of ceiling microphones whenever possible. And I'll just simply state that microphone technology has advanced substantially, where we now have intelligent microphones from a number of providers that are capable of varying their directivity under a number of different ways. So we have more options, but it's still what you're going to, anybody is going to install in any given room is going to have to work within the user's style of using the room, and it's going to have to comport with the room's, noise, decay, et cetera. We're still, there's some decision making that has to be made in choosing the technology, and there are a lot of ways to do it and a lot of tools to help guide people to get that figured out.
Great. Jim, did you have anything to add to that at all?
I was just thinking of some applications where there's etched silicon microphones, the mechanical silicon microphones instead of diaphragm type microphones, and all the things that go along with that and the proper engineering behind it. And then it gets put on a wall 35 feet away from the participants in the meeting. And folks wonder, why can't anybody understand what I'm saying when I'm in this room?
Mm-hmm.
The notions of getting the microphone as close to the talker as possible. And that brings up the idea of the huddle room and perhaps the pandemic demise of the huddle room. As people are afraid of, reasonably afraid of being too close to each other for extended periods of time in an enclosed space. And that's going to depend a lot on how things go in the next few months, whether people become more comfortable with that or not. The room acoustics playing the big part in how things are heard at the other end. And there's this weird thing about people seeming to be unwilling to spend money on the audio portion of the system. If they can get a 105-inch display, that makes people really happy. But if they can get 90% more intelligibility at the other end, they go, we can hear it. That's okay. And something gets lost there. And I don't know how to approach that, so that people can understand that the audio part makes a big difference. And it, for me, it seems like a lot of it is that they're not at the receiving end.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't pay attention to it.
And oftentimes that's a better expense of your budget as well too. It by meaning that it's probably less expensive to improve the audio, or you can do it for the same price as putting in a 98-inch display or 105-inch display, and make a huge improvement on that.
I'd argue that the slide deck that Troy used at the beginning of this pretty much very clearly stated that people do care about audio quality. So I don't I maybe the part of this that needs to be done is educating folks that we get that you want audio quality, and you need to have an understanding of what it's going to cost so that you can tailor your budget to get the quality that you are desiring in order to be able to have great meetings.
Yeah,
I think the pandemic raised people's awareness even more, Jay, to that point.
But you had this really interesting slide, Troy, of the that people seem to be more willing to spend money on video than they were on the audio.
That's unfortunate. I mean, that's, I think, corporate decision. The good news is that a lot of corporations employers during the pandemic actually provided a stipend to people to improve their home setups. So immediately from the onset of the pandemic, when everybody switched to a remote situation, there was an immediate realization that things weren't as good at home, technically, than they were at the office. So.
Yeah, just one quick interjection is that, when we talk about audio system, we need to open the conversation with end users that includes room acoustics, that includes noise intrusion, having HVAC systems that are balanced, et cetera. So it's not just write a check for technology. You probably need to take a look at everything. And we, as an industry, I think, need to do a really good job at conveying the value of taking care of the room and delivering a system.
Yeah, and unfortunately for a lot of integrators who are in at a tail end, the very tail end of a project, they're often pointing to those things, but it's falling on deaf ears. So hopefully that situation improves.
It's a similar situation when you're brought in after the fact to try to remediate a room. Maybe the architect has done the acoustical design themselves rather than calling in an acoustical consultant or an AV consultant who has skills and background in that to help guide them.
And the cost of lowering the feet per minute on an HVAC system, goodness,
yeah,
it never happens.
Yeah. It's I've run into situations where we've been called in to verify a room or to commission a room, and they haven't done the balancing on the HVAC systems yet. And that's caused huge problems. We end up having to go fix this first, and then we'll come in and talk about the system operation itself. Okay. A question that came up, Troy, you made a comment earlier on about a reduced need for huddle spaces. And the questioner makes the comment that it seems to them that they become very valuable in a hybrid model where only 2 to 3 people in a meeting room or in the office while others are remote. Can you expand on why you think it's a less valuable approach or a less valuable room?
Yeah, because for 2 or 3 people, I mean, it's just the logistics of 2 or 3 people reporting to an office for that meeting, right? If you happen to be in the office, fine. But as we move towards a hybrid model, what are the chances that those 2 or 3 people are going to be in the office to just jump in a room quick? Prior to the pandemic, when everybody was all hands on deck and everybody was reporting to the office on a daily basis, huddle rooms made a lot of sense, right? It was like, let's go do a quick meeting and talk with the other group in Austin, right? Now, if those 2 or 3 people aren't in the office, it doesn't make a lot of sense for them to get on a train and go to the office just for that one meeting. Everybody's kind of figured out how to do it remotely at this point. So I'm not saying that they're going to go away completely. I'm just saying that the emphasis was very high on huddle rooms pre-pandemic, and I think it's a little bit less now post-pandemic.
And I think to add to that, a lot of the open office plans drove the need for, I need a space where I can speak privately with other, maybe a few other people. And now that open, viral swirl office space is probably going away somewhat, or at least changing and morphing. And so I think that supports Troy's point as well.
Yeah. And listen, there's a big question mark on to what rooms are larger enterprise accounts going to build now moving forward, right? The medium room is probably the safest bet, right? Because a medium room that once held 25 people may only hold 12 now because of social distancing limits. So I think the medium-sized room, we may need to reconfigure because the seating is different. Planning it is maybe a little bit different. But, you know, that small room and the very large room, you know, it's easy enough to do a one-to-many remote at this point. You know, do you need everybody in a large space, in an auditorium space, if you're a large enterprise account?
Okay, great. It's a little bit of a commercial break here. We're at 11 o'clock. And for those of you who are looking for your RUs, for your certifications, you'll have earned them at this point. We're going to carry on. We do have some more questions here for people who are interested in sticking around and listening to that. But I'd like to thank everyone who has participated and listened in on this so far. So wanted to talk a little bit about a question was raised as to whether or not people will notice the shortfalls of room-based audio systems after spending so much time using personal audio devices that are typically very close talk microphones. And what kind of an impact do you think that will go ahead and actually drive the improvement in audio systems in conference rooms that are currently built out or planning to be built?
When they add mattresses and quilts to the conference rooms, so that it sounds like the audio coming from somebody's bedroom, it'll, you know, and it's a little bit facetious, but my goodness, a bedroom sourced audio from an open microphone is not terrible sounding. There's so many soft surfaces in there that it breaks up all the room modes and gets rid of any type of resonance that seems to be, could be present. And if we can somehow make that leap to the corporate environment, not of course taking the bed there, but, you know, taking the soft treatment, that acoustic absorber, and getting it into the room as a de facto implementation of a conference room.
Okay.
I'm not sure I agree with the mattress, but soft goods, yes, salad.
Yeah.
Too much temptation to lay down on
I was going to say the mattress will bring HR in pretty quick. Yep.
Yeah. Another question is any recommendations or best practices from anybody on the panel in regards to improving the incoming audio from a remote participant? Your outgoing audio may be great, your room may be great, and that's doing well, but you're having to deal with audio coming in from other people who have not so great situations or not so great equipment. Any recommendations or ideas on how to deal with that?
Well, I'll take the cheap shot there. Buy a decent external microphone, right, and figure out whether that's a USB mic, something that's going to improve the overall quality.
And send it to them.
Yeah.
And send it to them.
I have done that in a few instances. It was that bad. Yeah.
So that works in a one-to-many. Somebody who's got maybe a laptop that doesn't have a great microphone in it. That's not necessarily the answer for somebody who has a conference room that wasn't well designed, properly set up, good quality microphones. What could you do to fix that when you're the far end? And the things that come to mind are, one, there is no one set of parameters or filters you could maybe employ that's going to be universal for anybody who connects to your room, right? Although I guess you could do something with presets, in terms of maybe cutting bandwidth, high pass filters, things like that for somebody who doesn't have noise cancellation coming in from the far end. But I think you need to communicate with people that are delivering bad audio in meetings, so that you can quantify the problem, demonstrate the problem if it's somebody you regularly communicate with, so they can fix the problem.
You're really kind of limited on what you can do to fix far end issues. In some instances, there's an echo canceller that can be put in place to get rid of echo that other sites are causing. But that's a tricky balancing act. That's got to be time aligned with the compression and decompression delays, and whatever network delays are imposed, and that's its own little craziness. And you can apply EQ, but get a person in a room to figure out what kind of EQ to apply to a signal. You kind of need to think about, well, what's the next call going to be like now? Because chances are they're going to leave the system in whatever setting it was in when they finished that particular call. So now you've got a new call coming in, and it may not have a remote site that's got terrible audio. And how do you fix the fix?
I think the awareness that whichever room you're dialed into is bad is the first step. And then muting is always your best friend, both for troubleshooting and for noisy rooms. So.
Yeah. Just get rid of their audio.
I mean, it would be helpful then to go ahead and make a recording of what you're getting from the far site and sending that to that location and reminding them that you guys need some help here, and we're prepared to help do that, or we can turn you on to someone who can assist with that piece. So I think that's a good idea.
Friends tell friends they've got a bad conferencing set up.
Yeah. I mean, we're so used to it by this time of your microphone is muted, or I can't hear you, or tapping on your ears. That's something I think that we're pretty used to doing these days. Another question was whether or not how social distancing will impact overall room speaker and mic placement for larger meeting and conference rooms. And this may be a little self-evident, I'm not sure. Are we going to be moving towards more personalized microphones that people will be using, or going to ceiling microphones with a variable Q and a variable coverage pattern on those?
Well, I think the pandemic has spoken to that as well. We don't want appliances in a room that people can touch, right? From a sanitary viewpoint or a cleaning viewpoint. So I think we're forced, not only from an aesthetic standpoint, but from a safety standpoint, to put the microphones further away on the walls, on the ceiling, where they're not within reach of people.
So I'm sorry, go ahead, Craig.
No, I was just going to say, I hope the pandemic isn't going to be here forever, and that eventually we will have full conference rooms again. In the meantime, we may not have full conference rooms, but I think you still need to design them to cover where the participants will potentially be eventually as well. So I don't think, just from a conferencing perspective, I don't think it reduces the requirement for good audio pickup and good loudspeaker playback. It just may not be fully utilized for a little bit.
I'm just going to offer, we already have intelligence in microphones. We can control directivity. We have auto mixers, gated auto mixers. We've got the tools already installed in a lot of rooms that are adaptive to different size meetings within the room. So I think, if the industry keeps trending towards adopting the newer technology, I think we've sort of got the answer in place already. And it's a matter of getting systems widely deployed, making sure they're properly optimized. And again, not to dismiss, that people still need to have a good meeting hygiene in how they use their system. So if you wouldn't turn away from somebody when you're addressing them in a meeting or talk to the floor, if you're doing it in person, you shouldn't be doing that when you're doing it in a remote meeting as well. So there's a combination of factors that will help deliver great meetings. And I think ultimately that needs to be the deliverable: acoustics, systems, practices. And those things all together are going to be the prescription.
Good point. Another question that has come up is the college that this individual works at They've been experiencing a year of remote and hybrid classes, and he says that he or she says that they've figured out the importance of audio quality, but the problem is that they have classrooms that range in spaces that are 2 years old to 200 years old, and getting them to go ahead and spend money on room acoustics is not always possible, particularly in historic spaces and environments. Are there any ideas on that? What kind of basic tools or data can they use in-house to make a case for changing or not using a specific space for audio conferencing or video conferencing or hybrid learning?
Well, Jay mentioned recordings, right? I think that's maybe one of the best ways to go about doing that. You know, it's as you mentioned, it's very different when you put a microphone in a room and record what's going on versus what we hear when we're physically within the room. So I would look at recordings again to try to convince people that maybe one room is not ideal for conferencing purposes.
I would look at the application as well. So what is the exact problem trying to be solved? If it's picking up the presenter, then there are some nice wireless mic solutions that will get the mic capsule, close to the talker. It may not help the students if they want to participate interactively, but then, what do they do in other venues? They bring people closer to mics.
Yeah.
So again, I would look at which audio problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, if that's an option, obviously, that getting that mic close, as we've said, I don't know how many times on this, is key. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think the last question that we have here has to do with some applications, and this was mentioned a couple of minutes ago in regards to different size rooms. For spaces that need to be more multi-purpose, they're not necessarily room specific. They're asking the question about the use of, say, integrated AV bars, where you have both a video and a camera. You have the camera as well as the microphone built into those devices. Any comments about the use of those in spaces and what kinds of issues you may have run into for size limitations or audience size limitations, either physically or audience? So.
Well, they have a distance limitation, as Craig mentioned.
Definitely.
I mean, they may be suitable for certain smaller spaces, huddle rooms that we were discussing earlier. I prefer to call them small conference rooms, but there are distance limitations there, and expecting them to operate well in a large conference space. And people make that mistake all the time, mostly because it's a budget decision, right? It's look how inexpensive this is, and it's an all-in-one. It solves all of our problems. It's an all-in-one, right? Without really know what their issues are. So they're good in some applications, but can be a little bit distracting, perhaps, when people are looking at them for larger spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Troy, you hit on something. You may have a fundamentally really good technology, but misapplying that technology to an installation where it's out of its league for any number of reasons. It can I think deter people from using that technology again where it actually is appropriate. So it's important to evaluate specific to how you're going to use the space and the conditions of the space where you want to direct the technology solution.
And don't fall victim to marketing. There's a catchphrase that a friend of mine used to use: marketing's what gets used when the truth won't work. A lot of times the specifications, applications get stretched just a little bit beyond what might be optimal. And people pay the price for that in a bad experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where being familiar with the technology and having some more experience will let you identify where some of the limitations are. And certainly I would encourage people to have some demo product, have some microphones, have some DSP products, maybe even in their own demo rooms for their companies, so they can learn a little bit more about the audio artifacts and where the limitations are.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So let's see, what else do we have here for or questions that we can respond to. We're getting near the end of this. So the question here is that while each space handles audio differently and different applications deal with noise reduction differently, is there any one application or solution that handles audio suppression noise reduction better than others and provides better sound reproduction? And that is a loaded question.
I think, one thing that Jay mentioned earlier is having right levels for any system will help improve the performance of any of the products that people are using. The number one problem with echo cancelers typically has been either the reference hasn't been right, or the level hasn't been right, or the mics were, just not wired properly, or things like that. So getting good levels, to Jay's point, is going to help everything work better.
Okay, great. Well, I think that we have covered all of the questions that have come in in one level or another, one way or another. I'd like to thank everybody on the panel: Craig Richardson from Avio, Jim Smith from Sound Control Technology, Jay Paul with Biamp Systems, and Troy Jensen with Shure Audio. This has been a tremendous opportunity and a great discussion. Thank you all for participating and lending us your years of experience and background in this. And I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you, Luana.
Thank you all. What a great discussion. So just as a reminder, again, just give the 5 or 6 business days to, oops. Can y'all hear that?
No, you're good. 5 to 6 business days to get the recording up online.
Here, let me.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And yes, you should receive your RU on your certificate, on your transcript, that's the word, on your transcript soon. And if you don't, please email AVIXA at certifications@avixa.org to get that worked out. Thank you so much, panelists. This was fantastic. And keep an eye out, everyone, for the next webinar in the series. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
team AVIXA.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Panelists.
AVIXA. Yes, great job.